folks, it's Jeff here. Just a quick reminder, if you're loving Disney Coast to Coast, there are a couple of easy ways that you can support the show. We'd love it if you could rate and review us on iTunes, or wherever you listen to the show. This is a simple way to help other Disney fans find us. Also, go ahead and share your favorite episodes on social media and be sure to tag us. You can find all of our social media information at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. And finally, I just want to say thank you to all of you who listen every week. Your support is very appreciated, and we love that you're enjoying our Disney geekiness. Now on with the show.
Is your magic meter running low? Well, we've got a cure for you. Welcome to Disney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm Jeff DePaoli, and today on the show, I have Doug Marsh with me, who is the media spokesman for the Carrollwood Foundation. Welcome to the show, Doug.
It's nice to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on. We're actually going to be having an event pretty soon over at Walt's Barn in Griffith Park, which, of course, the Carolwood Foundation runs. That event is on Sunday, May 20th, and the hours are, I believe, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m.?
11 a.m. to 3 p.m., and this is also assuming that your listeners are getting this before May 20th. After May 20th, you won't be able to see them.
We won't be there, but the barn will still be there, and there's still loads of good information in this podcast if you're listening after May 20th, 2018. But in any case, let's jump into some of the history of Walt's Barn right now.
It's time to dive into today's Disney Dialogue.
Okay, so the Carolwood Foundation says that they are preserving Walt Disney's railroad legacy. So I would like to know a little bit about the Carolwood Foundation, when it was founded, and really what you guys are doing over there.
Well, okay. Well, the Carrollwood Foundation is a nonprofit organization. We are a 501c3, and initially we were founded to essentially manage Walt Disney's Carrollwood Barn in Griffith Park. The barn was moved there many years ago under the auspices of the Walt Disney Family Foundation and the Carrollwood Pacific Historical Society. The society is a membership club. And the foundation enabled the organization to do a number of things that a club would typically not be able to do, not the least of which was when we started getting into a lot of things that were more appropriate for a nonprofit. And really the big impetus for the nonprofit was when the opportunity to acquire the Santa Fe and Disneyland Railroad combine car. And that's also on display with Walt's Barn. And then the foundation also spearheaded getting Ollie Johnston's backyard railroad depot that was at his home. He had live steam in his backyard. And a number of other items have come our way, and I'm sure many of you have heard about the mine train engine from the Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland, which is not on display because we're in the process of taking care of the restoration of that. And so that's how the foundation came about, so that we could, as we say, preserve Walt Disney's railroad legacy in a true nonprofit and somewhat more scholarly way than, say, a private club could.
And I'm not sure if we said this, this is in Griffith Park in California. Another cool thing about Griffith Park, of course, is that story of Walt Disney sitting at the merry-go-round in Griffith Park, and that's where he came up for the idea of Disneyland. So there actually is some pretty nice Walt history scattered around Griffith Park in California, and it's a cool thing that I think a lot of people don't really know about. So it's great that it's there. I love it.
Oh yes, and the barn is on the grounds of the Los Angeles Live Steamers, a group that organized in 1956, and Walt was a member of the Live Steamers. And there's a lot of, as you say, a lot of associations. The merry-go-round is still there; it's just up around the corner, and then we're also right next door to Travel Town. We are not in Travel Town; we're next door to Travel Town. And then, as you say, it's where Walt Disney used to sit and watch his daughters in the 1930s ride the merry-go-round.
Yeah, Disney fans come to Southern California, of course, to visit Disneyland, but obviously there's a lot more Disney history around Southern California than just the park, so it's pretty cool. But since you mentioned it, I did want to talk to you about, there's quite a few train groups, I guess, in Griffith Park, and one of them is the Los Angeles Live Steamers Railroad Museum, which you say you're a part of, yes?
Well, we are affiliated with them in the sense that the compound that holds Walt Disney's barn and the Combine car and Ollie's Depot and so on is right there within the footprint of the Los Angeles Live Steamers. But we are two separate nonprofit organizations.
Okay. And then what exactly is the Travel Town Museum? I know this is outside of your expertise and what you do, but I'm just curious if you know.
Well, the Travel Town Museum is a museum that is operated by either the city or county of Los Angeles, and it is dedicated to all transportation history. They have a very large collection of train items, and here's a little bit of trivia that you might not know. It's very arcane. Among the holdings at the Travel Town Museum are cars and an engine from the Oahu Rail and Land Company in Hawaii. They were brought here in the 50s, and they were operated as the Crystal Springs Railroad, which ran from Travel Town to the zoo. Well, the Oahu Rail and Land Company was on the island of Oahu. It originally operated on the sugar plantations and then eventually became a major transportation system for the city of Honolulu and for the base at Pearl Harbor. After the war, rail fell out of fashion across the country and in Hawaii rather rapidly. And as a consequence, they ended all of their passenger activities, but Pearl Harbor base was still using shuttles and things on the base. Well, a group in the 1950s organized in Hawaii to preserve the Oahu Rail and Land Company. They have one set of track that runs from close to downtown out to a little point, and they run right past the Aulani Resort.
Ah, very cool.
If you go to Aulani, you will drive over the tracks of the Oahu Rail and Land Company, now the Royal Hawaiian Railway Society. Furthermore, when the cars and engine were acquired from Oahu and brought to the United States, to Los Angeles, all of the live steam buffs were so excited they went down to see it, including Walt Disney. There are photos of Walt sitting on the steps of one of the cars signing autographs for people. Furthermore, there's pretty strong evidence that he actually had his Imagineers look at those rail cars and use them as the models for the engines and I mean for the cars that were built at the studio. Not a coincidence, I think, that the track for the Oahu Rail and Land Company over in Aulani are exactly the same width as the track at Disneyland. Standard narrow gauge, and I believe that when Walt saw those, he said, yep, this is what's going to work. So if you go to Aulani, when you're driving over that track, think of Disneyland.
I actually vividly remember driving over that track. It seemed a little bit out of place around all those resorts and stuff. It's like, there's a train that comes through here, so that's really funny.
Yeah, next time you go to Aulani, ask if you can take a day trip into the town and go to the Royal Hawaiian Railway Society, and you can actually take a train past the Aulani Resort and all the way out to the point and back again.
Interesting. Huh. Well, wow. You have a lot of knowledge on this subject.
It's very arcane, and
no, I love it.
When they opened Aulani and we went out for the opening, I was looking at a Google Earth map, and I saw on the map train tracks, and I said, a train in Hawaii? So I researched it and found this out, and so I was actually able to make a day trip out there to ride it.
Well, another train situation over at Griffith Park is the Griffith Park and Southern Railroad. What are they exactly?
That is, for lack of a better term, a kiddie railroad.
Okay.
And it's a little train that runs, and it's a lot of fun. It's fun for kids. And I have, a couple of times I started to look and see if there was any connection. I don't believe there would be a connection with Disney to that particular one. I could be wrong. It's happened before.
But it's easy to say, if you are a Disney fan or a train fan, Griffith Park has both and many options for both. So it's a pretty cool place to hang out. So I am curious, how exactly did you guys acquire the barn?
Well, we didn't really acquire the barn. The barn is there directly under the auspices of the Walt Disney Family Foundation.
Is that the same group that runs the Walt Disney Family Museum?
That's the Family Museum. That is the organization that grew out of Rett Law, which was Disney's private company. And they are, as I say, they are a 501c3. And they we are very proud that they are supporting our efforts up here, or down here in this case, in Los Angeles.
Okay, and so did they contact the Carrollwood group, or how did that come about that you guys would move it to Griffith Park?
Well, I wasn't there at the time, so I don't really know everything that was done, but I do know this. When Lilly Disney passed away in 97, the terms of her will was that the property that she and her husband had in Holmby Hills would be sold.
Okay, so she lived there until her death.
She lived there until she passed away. Yes.
Okay.
And and a lot of people don't know this too. She remarried after Walt died.
I didn't know that.
And yes, and she actually outlived 2 husbands. If a lot of times when you're looking for information about Lilly Disney, you want to also look up Mrs. John Troyens. And in fact, at the time that the book, the Walt Disney Railroad story, was written, her name was Troyens. And but the Troyens were family friends of Walt and Lilly, and his wife died, and then Walt died, and then the 2 of them eventually married, and then she lived beyond. She lived to a very great advanced age, and so for the terms of her will, the property was sold. The house was actually demolished, and a new house was built in its place, a much larger house. And the family, though, made arrangements to have the little barn disassembled and brought to Griffith Park, where the live steamers were located.
Okay. And then, so I'm a little bit lost. When was the Carolwood Foundation founded then to get involved?
The Carrollwood Foundation started about 7 or 8 years ago, and that was about the time that we acquired the Combine car. And so, as I say, the foundation is a nonprofit organization which now oversees all the activities at the barn.
Interesting. Okay, cool. So just for the folks who don't know, can you tell us a little bit about the barn? You know, why did Walt have a barn in his backyard in California?
Why did Walt build a barn in the backyard of a house in Holmby Hills, California?
Yeah.
Not a lot of farms up in Holmby Hills. Well, the fact is, Walt Disney had a love of barns going back to his childhood. As I'm sure you and many of your readers know, Walt spent many years in his childhood in Marceline, Missouri. At the age of 5, the family moved from Chicago, the city, out to the country. And for 6 years, Walt grew up on that farm, and he remembered those years as the happiest years of his life. If you think about Walt Disney's life and all the amazing, incredible, and wonderful things he did, he constantly returned to those happy years on the farm. And the barn that we have in Griffith Park looks very much like the one that was in Marceline. Now, the barn itself in Marceline did not survive, but there are no photographs of it other than an aerial photo that was taken of the whole farm. This was a 19th century phenomenon. Photographers would go out, and there is you can kind of get a detail photo, and you can see that the barn in Marceline looks a lot like the one that he had built in his backyard. Well, when Walt was working on a live-action motion picture in 1946, he was working on it called So Dear to My Heart. It combined animation and live-action, starred Bobby Driscoll. There was a setting in the live-action portions on a little farm in the Midwest, Granny Kincaid's farm. And this is where Danny, where the little boy is raising Danny the lamb. And when Walt was describing how he wanted the barn on that farm to look to the art director, John Cowles, he described it in really vivid detail. And in fact, people said he described it so vividly that he was not making up something. He was actually describing the barn he remembered from his childhood. Now, we do know exactly what the barn in So Dear to My Heart looked like, because there's prints of the film and you can see photographs of the set. And it looks exactly like the barn that was in Walt's backyard and that is now in Griffith Park. Well, this is because a few years later, when he decided to make a barn the centerpiece of his backyard railroad and his private little workshop and clubhouse, I sometimes these days refer to it as his man cave. The the plans that were used for the movie were simply taken, scaled down, and adapted for his backyard workshop and barn. So that's why there is a barn in Griffith Park and why there was a barn in Walt Disney's backyard.
Okay, so we had the original barn on his farm in Marceline, Missouri, and then he leaves Marceline. He makes a movie called So Dear to My Heart. He basically creates a replica of that. Do you know where they shot that film?
I believe it was shot in the Fox Hills.
Okay.
And the set for Granny Kincaid's farm is long, long gone. From the movie So Dear to My Heart, an interesting thing is the very opening scene of the film is set in a little town where there's a little rail depot. And that little depot, after the movie was over, was given to Ward Kimball.
Oh, wow.
Ward went to Walt and said, "What are you going to do with that depot?" And he said, "Well, it's a set. We're going to tear it down." Ward said, could I take it? Walt said, "Sure." Ward kind of got a pig in a poke because it was really only the front, the side, and the roof.
Huh.
Kind of held together with telephone poles and baling wire. Ward hauled it off to the San Gabriel Valley, finished and reconstructed it, and he used it as the station for his Grizzly Flats Railroad for many years. So that's where that was.
Huh, interesting. So we have the Marceline Barn, we have the So Dear to My Heart barn, then we have Walt's Backyard Barn, which is now in Griffith Park. And since then, Marceline has rebuilt the barn.
The farm where Walt Disney grew up is still there, and the farmhouse. The barn was long gone, but they decided they wanted to build a full-size barn. And so they actually used, in kind of bringing this thing full circle, they actually used the plans from the So Dear to My Heart barn, which was the backyard scaled-down version, to create a full-size version in Marceline. And yes, so you can go and see that at the Walt Disney family home in Marceline.
My signature is in there somewhere. I have no idea where.
So you signed the beam when it was out here in California?
No, I signed the barn in Marceline when I was in
you
Marceline.
went to Marceline. Okay. And they also had a beam here and people could sign.
Okay, that's cool. I went to, when I'm originally from Boston and drove across the country to move to California, and one of my stops was Marceline, Missouri, because of a special feature that I saw on the Lady and the Tramp DVD all about Marceline. And so I made a special trip and did the whole Toon Fest celebration, and it's basically full of signatures and notes to Walt.
Yes, and ironically, I have never had the pleasure of going there, and at the time that we had the beam at Walt's here in California to be signed, I was out of town on a business trip.
Oh, man.
So I never got to sign. So I keep saying that's on my bucket list of things to do.
It's a great little, so I would highly suggest if you're going to go, try and do it during their September Toon Fest celebration, because it's a fun little celebration they throw, but it is very, very cool. Just to think of the history of that place and to see Main Street in Marceline, Missouri is very cool. So.
And now, while you were out at the farm, did they also point out where the right-of-way for the Santa Fe Railway used to run?
I don't remember seeing... yes, it was like behind a park next to the museum, I believe, right?
Well, now, there's the tracks still run through town.
Okay.
But the reason that Walt also had a love of trains goes back to the same time in his childhood. The Santa Fe Railway right-of-way actually ran through the Disney family farm.
Okay.
And not only that, Walt's uncle, Mike, was an engineer on the railroad. And so young Walt knew that if he ran out into the fields when Uncle Mike's train was steaming past, he could wave his hand and Uncle Mike would blow a special train whistle just for him.
Oh,
so
wow.
for a 5-6-year-old little boy, this was a pretty exciting thing to know that there was someone in this big locomotive who knew him and was acknowledging him.
Yeah, that's super cool. I love that.
And Walt also worked on the railroads when he was a youngster, when he was a teenager. One memorable summer, he was a news butcher or a news butch. These were young men who wore a uniform and walked up and down the aisles of the trains, vending candy, magazine, gum, cigarettes, and things like that to the passengers. And so for Walt, trains also represented his first taste of independence, making a little money, although he said in later years he really didn't make much money that summer. And then also the first time to travel to faraway exotic places like Kansas City. So he never forgot that, and he even spoke in later years of arriving in small towns and standing on the steps in his uniform and seeing the way the other kids would look at him and think, wow, what an exciting life. he must lead. And it gave him a taste for, as I say, independence and doing things on his own. Walt continued his interest in trains, and it was really peaked, though, in 1948 when he took a trip to the Chicago Rail Fair. The nation's railroads all came together to celebrate the centennial of American railroading, and they had a big outdoor pageant. It was the old World's Fairgrounds from 1933, were converted over, and they had all of these glorious vintage locomotives restored, some on display, some actually operating. They had a big outdoor pageant called Wheels Rollin'. And Walt Disney went out. He took Ward Kimball with him, because he said, Ward is the one person I know who knows how to have fun. And they took the Super Chief from Los Angeles to Chicago, and they had a great time seeing all of these glorious vintage locomotives. And Walt, at that time, really, I think the nostalgia began sort of overwhelming him. There was also another of Disney's animators, one of the 9 old men, Ollie Johnston, who I mentioned before. He had a backyard depot. He had miniature trains in his backyard. Now, you knew that Ward Kimball had a full-sized working steam engine in his backyard.
Mm-hmm.
Now, his backyard was very large. He had a big piece of property in the San Gabriel Valley. And he actually purchased an engine in 1937 that was being sold as scrap. And he took it home. And for 50 years, he restored it and operated it as the Grizzly Flats Railroad. He also had a narrow gauge engine named the Chloe. The full size was named Emma Nevada. And Walt went to a lot of steam-up parties out at Ward Kimball's. Ollie Johnston, on the other hand, had a miniature live steam train running in his backyard. It was a 1 inch to 1 foot or 12-inch line. 1 inch to 1 foot is about the size of a modern dollhouse. And Ollie also had a little scale-down depot, which his son enjoyed playing in, along with his neighbor's boys, Frank Thomas's 2 boys. And in fact, Frank Thomas's son came when we dedicated the depot and told us some very charming stories about how they would play cowboys and robbers. One of them would rob the depot, and then the others would chase him around the backyard to bring him to justice. And that depot is, of course, now at the barn compound. And Walt went and saw those 1-inch live steam trains operating, and he decided that perhaps he could do this himself. Well, he and Lilly were getting ready to build a new house, what would prove to be their final home together, in Holmby Hills. They had a fairly good-sized piece of property. It was a long, narrow lot right off of Carrollwood Drive, and it had a big level area near the road, and then it dropped down into a canyon where there was a public access bridle trail. Halfway down the hill, Walt leveled out an area, and he named it Yen Sid Valley. Now, do I have to ask you, where did he come up with the name Yen Sid?
Disney backwards.
That's right, and I'm sure you know. It's fun when we talk to the people who come to the barn. Some of them don't quite know that, and they don't know that Yen Sid was the name of a character in a Disney film, and that, of course, was
the sorcerer
in the Sorcerer's
Fantasia.
Apprentice.
Yep.
And in the sequence in the original Fantasia, and also Fantasia 2000. But now you know that there was also once a Yen Sid Valley. And Yen Sid Valley was where Walt built his Carrollwood Pacific Railroad. He laid out a nice big figure 8, and because he thought that would give him a lot of good rail operations. And then, of course, being Walt Disney, he got very creative, and he started adding sidings and tunnels. And one night he came home very excited, and he says to his wife, "You know, Lily, we could run up the side of the house, all the way across the front, come down a trestle into the side yard, and back down into the valley, and give people a really great train ride." Well, Lilly Disney was already kind of unsure about this whole thing. She thought it was odd that her husband, who was nearly 50 at the time, wanted to play with toy trains in the backyard. And besides that, she pointed out that if the track went all the way around the house, it would run through her flower beds.
Mm-hmm.
There was a big picture window in the living room looking out onto the side. And she said, "I'm going to have formal flower beds here, and I can't have a train puffing ashes and soot all over my nasturtiums." Well, Walt went back to the studio, talked it over, came back and said, "I've got the perfect solution. We'll put a tunnel through the side yard, and we'll bank the flower beds up, and that way you can have flowers and I can have trains. Well, Lilly Disney knew once Walt had his mind set on something, he was going to have it. So she threw her hands in the air and said, fine, fine, build the tunnel. That's what Walt did. And in fact, he had the studio lawyer, Gunther Lessing, draw up a legal contract right of way for Walt Disney's Carrollwood Pacific Railroad to tunnel below Lilly and Disney's flower beds, and then had their daughters Sharon and Diane sign as witnesses to the contract. Yes. So this way, Walt was able to keep legal peace in the family.
That's hilarious.
And you can see the plans. We have a beautiful layout plan for the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad on display at Walt's Barn. And you can see that tunnel in the side yard, and if you look closely, it has a very shallow S-curve in it. This is because Walt thought it would be a lot more interesting if you entered the tunnel, you were momentarily plunged into darkness, and then as you came around the curve, you would see the light up ahead. So some people say that this was not only the first time Walt built an attraction for the public, but that he also plussed it, or made it even more exciting. Now, the contractor who was working on the railroad with Walt was going over the plans with him one evening and said, you know, Mr. Disney, if you straighten out this tunnel in the side yard, I could save you a few $100s on the contract. Well, Walt said, if I wanted to save a few $100s, I wouldn't be building this whole thing in the first place. Just build it the way it's shown, and that is what they did. And as I say, you can see it on the plans.
Now, this is a pretty extravagant little backyard project for man, but of course it's Walt Disney, so it's no surprise. But who wrote this? Was it just, you mentioned kind of the public, but it was just family friends, right?
It was family friends. Walt operated it from 1950 to 1953. And as he invited friends over, of course, he was a great host. And he loved showing off his toys. And it was so popular that not only did he have friends come over, but they started inviting their friends to come over. And then they started inviting their friends. Well, it got to the point where on some Sundays, Walt and Lilly could not be sure who might be at the front door when the doorbell rang. And if they had children with them, they were too tender-hearted to turn them away. So it reached the point where one Sunday afternoon in 1953, they were operating with friends and family and, frankly, some strangers there. And a guest was operating the Lilly Belle engine. They took the corner a little too fast. The train jumped the track, fell on its side, hot steam shot out, and all the children ran over to see what the excitement was, and a little girl burned her leg. Well, Walt and Lilly talked it over, and they said, you know, maybe it's time to put away the trains. And besides, by this point, summer of 53, Walt was already thinking of a much bigger place where he could entertain a lot more people, and that, of course, became Disneyland.
So were the trains just in storage from 1953 onward?
Well, the trains themselves actually, Walt only had one engine. As I say, he operated his trains from 1950 to 1953. If you go to the barn, you'll be able to see one of the gondola cars from the railroad on display. We're very fortunate to have that, and you can see what the scale was. We also have a couple of engines. We have an English engine that belonged to Walt, but it did not actually operate at Carrollwood when it was, he purchased it in England, and when it was being shipped across, water got into the hold of the ship, and the boiler was compromised. There is a photo of Walt examining it at the Disney Studio Machine Shop, but he never actually operated it. We also have a couple of engines that are built as copies of Walt's original Carrollwood Pacific 173, the Lilly Belle. You notice he named his engine the Lilly Belle. His wife was Lillian. He wanted her to love the engine as much as he did, and so he named it after her. The engine that he chose, number 173, was a beautiful Central Pacific Railroad engine. The Central Pacific had actually broken up the 173 in 1909. Walt never saw it, but there were photographs and working drawings. And so he had the studio machine shop build a beautiful reduced scale. It's considered the most well-built model steam engine ever built. It was built in 1.5 to a foot scale. You notice I say 1.5 to a foot. You remember Ollies trains were 1 inch to a foot. So Walt's train was half again larger than Ollie's. This is because Walt wanted his toys to be bigger than everyone else's toys. Now, the engine that we have on display at Walt's Barn when you go and see it is painted in the livery of the Disneyland engine #1, the CK Holiday. Walt wanted the Lilly Belle to be part of Disneyland, but he knew from the experience operating it for 3 years that it would not have the capacity he needed. So he had the studio build a 5/8 scale replica of the 173. So when you go to Disneyland and see engine #1, it is 5/8 the size of the full-sized Victorian original. And it is 5 times larger than the 1/8 scale Lilly Belle engine that operated in the Carrollwood Pacific, with the exception of one detail. Here's a little piece of trivia, because I know you guys like a little insider trivia things. One part of the engine at Disneyland is really out of scale, and that's the cab on the engine. This is because, as brilliant and creative as Walt Disney was, he was not able to come up with 5/8 scale people to operate his trains. He had to make those cabs large enough that the engineers and the firemen could get inside. So if you look at the roof line on most Victorian locomotives, the roof line is well below the sand dome and the steam dome, and very, very far below the stack. And that's true on the 1/8 scale engine too. But the 5/8 scale engines, the roof line is up higher. And also, all of the roofs have little curves or little peaks, which for cross-country trains would not have been done because they would have had too much drag on them. Well, that's because they needed to get as much room as possible in that cab. Despite this, you'll often see the engineers and firemen at Disneyland kind of leaning over to one side when they stand up. This is because they are out of scale to the rest of the railroad.
That's interesting. One thing I've learned from what you've been saying is I feel like Walt paid his original animators pretty well if they all had these trains in their backyard and stuff.
Well, yes. Also, it was not. Well, actually, it was just 2 of them. You know, everybody has passions in life, and you know, likes to do different things. Ward was collecting vintage trains and things at a time when it was relatively inexpensive. He bought his engine for scrap, for the value of the scrap metal.
Okay.
Being broken up, and he bought it and took it home. He already had 2 train cars. He was thinking of using them to display his antique toy trains. At the time, it was considered an eccentricity for an adult to be collecting old. They were just old trains at the time, but they made him happy. So that's what he did. Ollie enjoyed the live steam. He said that if you think about this as an animator, he said a steam train is as close as you can get to an inanimate object appearing to be alive. He said it breathes, it moves, and every engine has its own personality. And coming from an animator who takes, you know, inanimate drawings and brings them to life, that's quite an interesting insight.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, obviously, Lilly and Disney had kept the barn in the backyard until she passed away. Did the tracks remain in that yard as well at that time?
You know, in 1953, they decided to, you know, put the trains away for a while, and Walt concentrated on Disneyland. So the Lilly Belle engine and the consist were parked in the tunnel in the side yard.
Oh, okay.
And then when Disneyland opened, Lilly Belle actually was there. If you go to the station at Main Street and walk inside, you will see that there is a very curious angled wall in one corner that doesn't match the exterior of the building. As you walk inside, turn to the right and walk over to the corner, and you'll see a wall that has photos of Walt Disney with his backyard railroad and has a big clock hanging in the middle. That angled wall also has a lower section of the wooden wainscoting. You know, there's wood that goes about 3 feet up on the wall. There's a lower section of wainscoting on that portion of wall. There used to be a display case built into that corner, and Walt's Lilly Belle engine was there with a display about the Santa Fe Railroad and the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad. Many years later, after the Walt Disney Company changed over, the Disney family took a number of things that belonged personally to Walt and took them to the Carolwood Foundation. And so that display case was then closed up and was made into a plain wall. In fact, there's a little tiny office behind there that's accessed from the outside. Many people may have seen a big glass case, or actually you can now see a big glass case with a Lilly Belle engine parked in it. That's actually Lilly Belle 2. Lilly Belle 2 was financed by the Oriental Land Company, and they used pieces that Walt Disney had machined and tooled. He always wanted to have a couple of engines running in the backyard at Carrollwood, but he never did that before Disneyland was built. And so Lilly Belle 2, which is what is on display at Disneyland now, was built by the Oriental Land Company as part of a display that was at Tokyo Disneyland for a couple of years. And then after that was done, it reverted back to Disneyland. They also used to display at Main Street Station Walt's personal hand-built caboose. He hand-built a beautiful little yellow caboose that operated in the backyard. He built it at the studio machine shop where he apprenticed himself to Roger Broggie, the Disney studio machine shop, the head of the machine shop there, who was also the head of like the camera department. He didn't just, carpentry thing. He was the head of the camera department. Roger Broggie, a Disney legend. And Walt had a pair of coveralls. He would go down to the studio machine shop. He would put on the coveralls, and everybody understood at that moment Roger Broggie was in charge, and Walt was just there as a worker. And he learned how to do metalworking and dyeing and casting. Walt was already a fairly competent carpenter. When he was a youngster, his dad taught him carpentry. And in fact, Walt built all of the wooden furniture that you see in the barn, all of the work tables. And when he had the barn, it was filled with tools and lathes. And Diane Disney Miller describes how her father would build beautiful doll furniture and doll houses for her and her sister out in the barn and in workshops when they were growing up.
Wow. Now, inside the barn in Griffith Park, it's kind of a museum at this point. Can you tell folks a little bit about maybe some of your favorite items in there? I know you mentioned a couple already, but...
Oh, my. There's so many things there that we have. But I think what people really appreciate seeing are things that are personally connected to Walt Disney. You would ask, what happened to all the track that was at the house. Mm-hmm. Walt actually made arrangements just a few years before he died to have all of his track brought to the live steamers, and it was used to create the Disney Loop. And they still call it to this day, pardon me, the Disney Loop. Now that track was made out of extruded aluminum. And after many years of heavy use, it began to wear out, and so they replaced it with steel track. And that track that he had, you can always tell because it has remnants of black paint on it. Walt wanted his track to look just like the full-sized original. So he had all of his track powder-coated with black paint. So if anybody ever says, this is original track, take a look and see, does it have black paint on it? We actually have a section of portable track that was used for a Disney television program in which you see the little train running around the Disney studio. That was done using portable track and a little bit of camera magic to make it appear that the trains were operating there. That was actually just temporary for a single TV program. So other things that personally belong to Walt there are his English engine, the large green engine. We also have one of Walt's hats there, interestingly enough. The other day I was just realizing, curiously enough, we have 3 hats, one belonging each to Walt, Ollie, and Ward. We have a fire hat that Ward Kimball had for the Firehouse 5, which was actually used for the Tournament of Roses Rose Parade. We have Ollie Johnston's plaid flat tam that he wore, and then we have one of Walt's little pork pie hats, and that's there. Another item that had personally belonged to Walt is a little brake wheel casting. It's a very small item. You have to kind of look closely for it. It's in a little case over among Ollie Johnston's items because Walt actually gave it to Ollie. And it's described in the book Walt Disney's 9 Old Men by John Canemaker. And in the book, it's kind of funny because Ollie says people warned him not to get too friendly with Walt. He says, and this was Ollie speaking, he said, they told me don't dance too close to the Queen. And because, you know, you're apt to you might get burned. But he said, what could I do? Walt was so excited about trains and model railroading, and so was I, and he even gave me a gift of a little brake wheel. Well, we have that little brake wheel that Walt Disney gave to Ollie Johnston on display, and that represents their shared love of trains. There are also items that personally belonged to Ollie Johnston, Ward Kimball, Roger Broggie. Roger Broggie's toolbox is there. Also, Roger Broggie's camera that he took literally thousands and thousands of documentary photos of projects and things on. Another thing we have that's very, very rare, we have one of the Disney Legend Awards.
Oh, nice.
It was presented to George Bruns, and since it was awarded posthumously, they actually did not have anyone to take it, and so it is currently, we are storing it for them, and it is on display. We also have a panel from the original Disneyland Allweg monorail, and on it you can see Santa Fe Allweg monorail, and it has the Santa Fe emblem on it because Santa Fe had an agreement. Anything that ran on a track was sponsored by Santa Fe in the early years. And so those are the items that I would say I'm always most excited to show people.
Very cool. So next to Walt's Barn, you also, as you mentioned, have Ollie Johnston Station. I'm curious, how did you guys acquire that station, and yeah, how did that happen?
Well, the little station is it's a little one-room depot, is what it is, and Ollie. It's kind of funny how that came about in the first place. Is Ollie wanted to have a little structure back there, but his backyard was a lot smaller than Walt's, and for that matter, Ward Kimball's. Ward bought several acres in what was then county, and still it's county near San Gabriel and Rosemead, and so he bought farmland and then built a nice house in the front with a pool, and then had all of his trains in the back, and he had a big straightaway of track. Ollie had a smaller layout, and so he had the 1-inch trains. And his little depot is actually a scaled-down version of the depot that appeared at the opening scenes of So Dear to My Heart. When Walt was planning the film, he actually had the designers consult with Ward, because he knew Ward had a lot of information and a library of vintage railroad memorabilia. And Ollie brought a book to them, and he had a page marked, and he said, this is the kind of depot that they would have had in this little one-lung town where you have the opening scene. And so the little depot that was built there was then used, the same design was used by Ollie for his backyard depot, and then it was also used as the same design for the Frontierland depot that is now in New Orleans Square. And, a funny story connected with that: when Walt was building Disneyland, he, as you know, was perpetually running short of money and was in constant need of ways to cut corners. And at one point, he called Ward into his office and he said, "Ward, you remember that little train station that I loaned you from So Dear to My Heart?" Ward says, "I remember the one that you gave me." Well, says, "Well, I need it back for Disneyland." Well, bear in mind, what Ward really got was a pile of very pretty lumber.
Yeah. And
he had laid a slab and had built a full structure and installed the whole thing. He basically said, "No, you're not going to get it back because it's permanently installed in my backyard." But they did use the same designs. Well, this was in Ollie's backyard up until the time Ollie actually moved away. Ollie's family moved him to Washington State after his wife passed away. And the house was sold. And the new owners were planning to build a much larger house. Sounds like a theme here. And so the family offered it to the Carolwood Foundation. And so we made arrangements to have it disassembled and brought to Griffith Park, where we then had it reassembled. And we had a lovely dedication with Jeanette Thomas, Frank Thomas's widow, was there, and also his son Ted was there talking about it. So that's how that came to be there.
That's fantastic. Well, there is a lot of Disney history in this little corner of Griffith Park. So, folks, I invite all of you to come join us on Sunday, May 20th, 2018 in Griffith Park at Walt's Barn. You can check out Walt's Barn. You can check out Ollie Johnston Station. You can check out the Retlaw 1 Combine. The Pizza Planet truck will be there for photo ops, and I will be there recording you guys, getting your thoughts on Walt's Barn, and then maybe you can be a part of a future episode of Disney Coast to Coast. And all of this is pretty close to the original merry-go-round that gave Walt the idea of Disneyland, so you can go visit that as well. It sounds like a fun-filled Disney Sunday, in my opinion, so I hope that y'all decide to come out and join us. And Doug, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling me a bit about it.
Yes, happy to be here. And I did want to mention one thing, because I always feel I have to do this. The Pizza Planet truck will be there only on May 20th.
Yes.
So if you want to see that, you have to come out on May 20th. But you come out any third Sunday of the month. We are open. We are the only regularly operating Disney attraction in the world that is completely free to the public on the third Sunday of every month. And in June, July, and August, we will actually be open the first and third Sunday of each month. So I hope that you will come out and see us. Also, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. We will tell you who our guests will be and what other, we have an exciting podcast coming up, so you can come and see us.
Yeah, actually, since you brought it up, why don't you tell folks about, you guys have some really cool events, and me going is nothing compared to what you normally have. So why don't you tell folks about some of the cool guests you've had in the past?
Oh my, we've been very fortunate. Since we're located so close to the studio and we're right there in Burbank, we can draw on a lot of people. And also, Walt Disney, there's a lot of affection for Walt Disney. And so just last month, we had Jeff Cordy, who was there with his new book, Travels with Walt Disney, and Traveling with Walt Disney. We've also had any number of authors. Mindy Johnson has been there. Marcy Smothers, I'm thinking of the most recent ones. We've also had people who worked with Walt Disney. Bob Gurr has been a guest, Rolly Crump, some people who have since passed on. Marty Sklar came out to do a book signing. We had it wasn't Fred Jorger, it was George McGinnis came out and brought along all these things from his work on the Horizons exhibit at Epcot. And then every year in our December meeting, we have a very important visitor from the North Pole. Santa arrives by train. And so we have that event. And then from time to time, we also hold special events, which are ticketed events. Now, bear in mind, the Sunday events are free to the public. We do occasionally hold ticketed events, and as I say, follow our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter to find out about that. The last big barbecue we had, we were very happy to have Ron Dominguez and Tony Baxter talking about the mine train through Nature's Wonderland. We also have had Bill Farmer and Brett Iwan, the voices of Mickey and Goofy, came out and met with us. And so we get a lot of people. Also, you never know who might just happen to drop by on any given Sunday. Margaret Carey, who was the model for Tinkerbell, drops by. Bob Gurr very often drops by. And then sometimes if you just kind of keep your ears open, you might hear people talking and somebody will be saying something like, yes, I remember when we were working on that back in 1982. And you might, that's the way we learn a lot of new things about things in the company and things at the barn.
Yeah, I met Exitencio there when he was doing a signing once. This was years ago, probably like 8 or 9 years ago at this point, but I met him there. And you guys have so many great events. Your official website is carolwood.org, so folks, you should go check that out. And as I mentioned, I'll be there Sunday, May 20th. Hope to see you guys there. But of course, that means
it's trivia time!
Okay, Doug, do you want to hit me with a trivia question first, or shall I hit you?
Oh, well, now I didn't know you were going to try and hit me with one.
Oh yeah, I got one for you.
I'll tell you what, you hit me and then I'll hit you. That we will have, it's kind of a, I don't know, bad news, good news.
All right.
Okay, hit me.
Which Disney Magic Kingdom park is not surrounded by a train? And there are 2 of them.
Well, Animal Kingdom is not surrounded by a
which
train.
Magic Kingdom park?
Oh, which Magic Kingdom park of all the ones across the world?
Yep.
See, I think Magic Kingdom, I think of Florida. Well, of course, in Japan, they could not put the train all the way around. I've heard so many urban legends on this. So the train only surrounds Western land.
That's right.
I will give you that one, and then you can give us the other one.
Shanghai Disneyland is not surrounded by a train.
Right. The new one is not is also not surrounded by a train. But and I want to tell you, this is wrong. This is just wrong. And I have to say that as a member of the Carrollwood Foundation, it should be surrounded by a train.
Yeah, so the story I've heard, at least about Tokyo, I don't know about Shanghai, but I've heard that they cannot have a train that surrounds the entire park because of the length of track that the train would entail. It would then become part of the Tokyo government, and Disney would not. Is that true or false? Do you know?
The way I understand it, it depends. Some people say it's because of the length, and other people say because of multiple stops. If it makes more than one stop, it then becomes an actual public transportation system, and it is then subject to all government regulations, and it would actually become, as you say, a public transportation system.
That's interesting. I feel like if that were the case, they would have just been like, we'll still build it. We'll just have one stop. Which makes me think maybe it was the length thing, but I don't know. I could be wrong.
Yeah, but other than that, Tokyo Disneyland is of course an exquisite park, and the Western Land Railroad. I think they chose the right place to put it.
Cool. All right, what's your trivia question for me?
A trivia question for you. I knew it needed to be something train oriented, and it had to do with Walt. And this is actually something I recently learned myself, courtesy of Jeff Quirty's new book. So if you've read Jeff's book, you should know the answer to this one. And here is the question. We all know Walt Disney arrived in Los Angeles in the summer of 1923. This is a two-part question, part not terribly hard and part that I don't expect you to know. What railroad did he travel, and where exactly did he arrive? What station?
Okay, I don't even know if this is a real name of railroad, but was it just the Kansas City Railroad? Was that the name of it? No?
No, it was the Santa Fe.
The Santa Fe. Okay. And where did it arrive specifically?
What station in Los Angeles did he arrive at?
Oh, goodness. I don't even know the names of any stations in Los Angeles. What's the big one in downtown?
The one that in many sources will state, and many people believe, which is Union Station.
That's what I would guess, yeah.
Or to use its proper name, the Los Angeles Union Passenger Terminal.
Okay.
Everybody refers to it as Union Station. However, Union Station was open to the public in 1939.
Oh.
And so Walt could not possibly have arrived there. So whenever you see anybody talking about young, wide-eyed Walt Disney walking into Union Station, you will know somebody didn't do their research. Jeff Quirty did, and he found that the Santa Fe that he arrived in was at the La Grande Station at 2nd and Santa Fe in downtown, and this is something that I think is just charming. It is now in the heart of the burgeoning arts district.
Oh, cool.
In Los Angeles. So that was the La Grande Station. So look it up, and you'll get a lot of information on that.
That's awesome. So guys, once again, you can learn all about the Carrollwood Foundation by following them on Facebook and on Twitter. Your Twitter username, I believe, is just @Walts Barn, correct?
@Walts Barn.
And on Facebook,
and we're also on Instagram.
Instagram as well.
Instagram, Walts Barn. Mm-hmm.
And Facebook, just search for Carrollwood Foundation?
Walt Disney's Barn.
Walt Disney's
There is
Barn.
a Facebook for the Carrollwood Foundation, but that is mostly, that is not where we update regular events at the barn. So look on Facebook at Walt Disney's Barn.
Fantastic. And once again, guys, please join me at Walt's Barn on Sunday, May 20th. If you can't make it then, I encourage you all to go any third Sunday of the month to check it out. It is a really special place. I've been several times, and any Disney fan will love it. Thank you so much, Doug.
Thank you for having us.
And before we get going, guys, I did want to let you know about something on our website over at DisneyCoastToCoast.com called America's Hidden Mickeys. And what this is basically a list of places across the United States, like Walt's Barn, that are all about Disney and Disney history and cool places for Disney fans to visit that aren't necessarily run by the Walt Disney Company. So if you want access to this list, all you got to do is head to DisneyCoastToCoast.com and click on Free Gift on the lower portion of the homepage, and you can sign up there to get that list for yourself. Of course, if you want to support Disney Coast to Coast and get some other cool rewards, head to patreon.com/DCTC, or you can click the Patreon tab over at Disney Coast to Coast. And be sure to leave those 5-star ratings and reviews over on iTunes to help other Disney fans find the show more easily. It is always appreciated. Other than that, have a magical day, everybody. Bye!
Thanks for watching Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePaoli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com.